Morning, YouTubers. On today's episode, we are going to be going a little bit more in depth with the FluxCore welder, the titanium 125 from Harbor Freight. Now, if you watch my other videos, I've been doing some testing on it, and this is just kind of another video in a series. So we're going to be using 3 different wires. We're going to use the Harbor Freight wire that's already in the machine. We're going to use this guy, US Forge. This came from Menards, but I believe it's pretty common on Amazon. And then we're going to test the Lincoln Electric. They call it NR211. That's like their part number, but all of these are what are known as E71T wires. So that's a nomenclature for FluxCore gasless, very common. They're all O30 wires. All right, I wanted to put this disclaimer in. The Lincoln Electric wire, it's known as the NR211, which is their nomenclature, but it's an E71T wire, but it's a -11. The other 2 wires are -GS. What that's referring to is the Lincoln Electric wire is suitable in theory for code work where you have to do multiple passes. The other 2 wires, or any wire labeled GS, generally is only suitable for a single pass weld. I thought I would mention this just because you might not know that. I personally don't use FluxCore for multiple pass welds anyways. I mean, I use it for light duty stuff, but you don't want to use a GS wire for a multi-pass weld like on a fillet. Hopefully that clears it up. 125 amps, trying to use 035 probably isn't the best, but we're going to use 030 because that's realistically what you're going to use in it. The setup will be, I'm going to do fillet welds, both sides with each wire, and then I'm going to do lap welds, both sides. Again, same deal. And then this stuff is only 1/8 inch material. I'm going to attempt to weld 1/4 inch as well, and we're going to see whether or not it has the depth of penetration or fusion with that on thicker material. Realistically, when you get up to that thick a material, you should be using 035. But for the fun of it, we're going to see if the machine will do it on 030. I think it will, but you know, who knows? We'll both find out, I guess. So anyways, that's what I got. Let's get into it. All right, got the welder all fired up. This is Harbor Freight's wire. We're going to run fillet weld both sides, and then we're going to do a lap weld. All right, well, mistakes were made. I welded both of these with the Harbor Freight FluxCore wire, and for some reason the camera stopped filming. So here's the result of this particular wire. Haven't even cleaned them off. Still pretty hot. Welded both sides. Overall, the welds look pretty good. Same thing with our lap joint. All welded up, haven't even cleaned them. So I'm going to buff them off, and then we're going to switch wires to the Lincoln and start welding with that. All right, I got a Lincoln NR211 wire loaded, and we're going to do our fillet and lap weld with that. A little bit hot there, you can tell it's still glowing, but ran one weld on one side and one on the other. I set the machine up a little bit, I don't want to say cold, but just about right the first pass. And with the preheat and the plate, the second pass, it's gonna run hotter. So I'll let these cool, sand them down, set them off on the side after I mark them, and then we're gonna weld with the US Forge. All right, so we got the Lincoln and the Harbor Freight done. I'm gonna tack up these, and then we're gonna run that other wire from US Forge. Well, there you have it. All sets of the test weld on 1/8 inch are all done. We'll let that cool off, clean them up, and we'll take a first visual inspection, see what they look like, and then we're gonna go to cut and etch. Well, all of these are cooled off and we're ready to go through them. So all of these are welded with 030 wire. Got your Harbor Freight wire, your Lincoln, your US Forge. Settings were E6 on the titanium 125. As far as voltage and wire speed, how that relates, couldn't tell you. So let's start looking at the lap welds. Here's the first pass on the Harbor Freight. Overall, pretty good. It's a little bit humped up, but not really too much. This gray stuff down there is just flux or slag that wasn't cleaned up. Not a big deal. Amount of spatter, pretty average. Nothing really excessive. This is the second side that was run hotter. Definitely seems to have more spatter. There's no doubt about it. This little bit here was probably, who knows, maybe it was me. But overall, pretty average. First pass that was colder definitely has less BBs and buckshot on it. Let's look at the Lincoln. So first pass, bead is a little bit humped up, but overall, really consistent. There's almost no spatter on it. Let's look at the other side. Again, very minimal spatter. I see this straight line at the very top of the weld. Due to the amount of heat that was in here and maybe my stick out got a little bit shorter, you'll start seeing that. Now what that's an indication of is that some of the gas was trying to escape the weld as it was solidifying. Had my stick out been any shorter, what would have happened is the weld would have collapsed around that gas pocket, pushed out, and then you get like a worm track through it. So pretty close. Definitely was the hot side. Had I waited longer to weld the second pass, drop my settings a little bit or increase my stick out, you wouldn't see that. But the weld inside is going to be solid. But yeah, I mean, overall, I like the appearance of this a lot better than a Harbor Freight wire. Ran at the same settings. I've never ran Harbor Freight wire and had consistently this little bit of BBs and buckshot on it. So overall, a lot cleaner. The US Forge, here's our first pass. Overall, pretty clean. Not really a whole lot of spatter. Much less than the Harbor Freight. Let's look at the back side. Really looking good. This guy right here was me. The gun was getting so hot in my hands that I had to reposition my finger because it was getting burned, so that's totally me. But I mean, overall, bead appearance, this looks really good. And I would say it has very little spatter. I mean, it's maybe not as little as the Lincoln, but overall, and again, this bead, there's some slag there I could have brushed off a little better, but overall looks really good. Let's compare fillet welds. So Harbor Freight, again, that gray stuff down there is just flux that I didn't clean off because it's a little difficult to get in there. Overall, pretty consistent. there's a start of, you got some porosity there. I welded to the end, held it and tried to bring it back just a little bit to fill in the end here, and I saw that happen in real time where it just popped out that porosity, that little start of a worm track. So not really too much spatter. You're never going to get much spatter up on the top plate, but pretty clean. If I would have brushed this out, it'd be a little bit more representative, but I mean, again, not bad. Let's look at the backside second pass. Overall, once that slag gets cleaned up a little bit better, which I really need a smaller brush on it, this weld would look pretty good. So my initial settings realistically were a little bit on the cold side, but I figured they would be so that the second pass would go in better. This pass has more spatter on it and some on the top plate, so a lot less here. Overall, not bad. Let's look at the Lincoln. Again, the slag in the bottom will come off with a little bit more brushing. Overall, the weird thing with this is it looks overall just flat out smoother compared to the Harbor Freight. I mean, definitely seems to be wet in a lot better. No spatter really on the top plate, the bottom plate, about the same as the Harbor Freight, maybe a little bit less. Let's look at the other side. That's looking real good. No indications of porosity or anything. Definitely more like smaller spatter. But overall, I mean, looking pretty good. The US Forge. This top plate has some spatter, bottom has pretty typical. Could have definitely cleaned the slag off on that a little bit better on the toe, but again, this is looking like overall a smoother bead, much like the Lincoln, a little different than Harbor Freight's. And the second pass, looking real good, very minimal spatter. Just, I mean, kind of, it pretty much looks like a 7018 bead. So overall, like that a lot. So as far as what we see here, I mean, we can draw a few conclusions. One is when I'm welding, the Harbor Freight wire seems to have a lot more like bigger spatter, like BB's buckshot coming off. The Lincoln probably seemed to just had real fine like bits coming off. So the spatter overall, and the plates show it too, spatter is better with the Lincoln than Harbor Freight. Bead appearance, I mean, honestly, looking at them, the Lincoln and the US Forge seem pretty comparable. If anything, the US Forge might even be, in some cases, a little better, Lincoln a little bit better. But in almost all the cases, they look better overall, just bead appearance than the Harbor Freight wire. Some other interesting things. I noticed, I want to show you something here. Look at how, and this was tensioned. It's not like I let this unspool itself. You can see it's not really wrapped too well. I mean, it seems to feed okay. Overall, it fed pretty good. And I noticed that part of the sticker got put in there, which that probably, you know, it could cause friction, bind up on the shaft for the welder. The Lincoln spool, overall better wrapped, but still a little bit loose. And this isn't my doing, this is how it came out. And one of the things I noticed while I was welding with this, and I think it was because of this sticker rolled over on the inside, and then as it spins, I think it was kind of catching up a little bit, because as I was welded, and if you listen to when I was welding it, it kind of had like a pulsating sound. And I don't know if that was this picking up speed and slowing down because of the sticker being caught in it, but it seemed to have more noticeable. But it didn't seem to affect the weld at all. I mean, arguably overall, it's, you know, I'd say almost the best out of the three of them. And then when you look at this US Forge, look how nice they wound that wire. like if you were going to have feeding issues, the other two wires without a doubt would be an issue. This thing is like perfectly wrapped. I like that. And the way they put the sticker on this, you can't, when you punch through it, you can't get any of the sticker on the inside. So overall, I mean, I'm pretty impressed with this stuff. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to buy it. Cost-wise, I paid, I think, like 20 bucks or $18 for this, and this is a 2-pound spool. This Lincoln locally, which I kind of got gypped, I guess, I didn't realize it, this is only a 1-pound spool. So same size plastic, half the amount, and I paid like 16 or 17 for this, so that's quite a bit of a difference. I'm going to put this caveat in here. Like I had mentioned earlier in the video, Lincoln wire is suitable for multiple pass and it meets certain code. If you're going to be doing a multiple pass weld or have to weld to a specific code, you want to verify that the wire you're using meets those requirements. So in the case of this, the fact that the Lincoln wire costs double essentially because you get half as much for the same amount isn't really a big issue, because if you need to do multiple pass or meet code, you don't have a choice. You have to use that wire. Now, for most of you home hobbyists that aren't welding code work or critical stuff, or realistically doing multiple pass welds with flux core, honestly, the double price of the Lincoln over the other wires isn't really worth it, at least in my opinion. It's just something to think of. And it really drives home the thought, at least, that if you're welding on something important, do a little bit of research on it. You don't want to make a mistake. And then this, I think I paid around 20 bucks, and this is again a 2-pound spool. So overall, just based on this so far, I would say if you can get US Forge for a good price, it seems to run as good, if not better, than the Lincoln. And it's probably, I'd say, almost half the price, at least around here locally, so that's not a bad deal. The last thing I want to take a look before we do a cut and etch, and I think this is going to be pretty interesting. I'm going to take some acetone and some clean towels and wipe these spools, and we're going to take a look at what kind of filth is on them. So the Harbor Freight clean towel, just a little bit back and forth. Pretty average amount of filth. A lot of that's actually just from the drum on the sides, but in the middle here, I mean, there's a decent amount of filth on there. Let's take a new one and do this on the Lincoln wire. This isn't a scientific test or anything, I'm just curious. Overall, I mean, the sides are from the side of the spool, but the middle, I would say, is about the same. Nothing really too major there. Let's do the US Forge. And look at that, significantly less. And that's what I expected. If you look at this wire, I mean, it almost looks like stainless steel wire. Like I said, overall, so far, I'm pretty impressed with this stuff. I wouldn't hesitate to use it in the future more. Well, let's get to cutting and see what the inside of these welds look like. Here's our cut and etch with the Harbor Freight wire. If you look, overall, the penetration looks pretty good. That dot or lack of fusion, I think, is just because of the shear cut steel. This lap weld's kind of hard to tell. Overall, I didn't put enough of a polish on it, but it's, you know, adequate, no real issues. Here's a Lincoln. Again, you see a little dot where I think the sheared edge just peeled up a little bit, not really porosity. overall looks pretty similar. Again, a little hard to see. This isn't the best, but same penetration as the Harbor Freight wire. No internal porosity that I can see. Overall, you know, good. This wire seems to have a little bit more penetration on the second pass, a hotter pass than others, but again, overall looking real good. No porosity. Really bit in there good. Can't really see a whole lot here, but yeah, I mean, overall, all the three wires I would say are pretty comparable for the overall depth of penetration as well as the fusion. So that was kind of fun to go through and do. I thought to end this, I would bust out a fillet gauge just to show you guys what kind of reinforcement we have here. So if you look here, this is an 1/8 inch gauge, this is 1/8 inch material. We're a little bit over on the bottom plate and we're actually a little bit over on the top plate. Our weld is pretty much smack dab in the middle. And then if you look at the throat of it, and I'll bring it up here, we're definitely, like this should be in there. So yeah, our throat depth is over. So this weld's actually a little bit bigger than you would need to have maximum strength. Not to mention the depth of penetration is like halfway through the top and bottom plate. So this flux core wire, and it's the same with the Lincoln and all of these, definitely a very strong process with a weld that thick on steel like this. No issue there. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think one wire is better than the other? What do you think? Give me your opinions in the comment section. I'm kind of curious about it. But yeah, that's what I got here. So thanks for watching for the whole video, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.